Okay, this last one's taken a little time due to interruptions and mosquitoes versus flies versus phone calls. But again, as a recap, primary piston's primary seal, primary piston's secondary seal at the rear, secondary piston's primary seal, and secondary pistons, let's say a secondary piston. Yeah, it's kind of a play on words. Return spring. You know how many times I've seen this spring when students put back the master cylinder and put it in like that, which just jams this guy completely forward, so it makes no sense whatsoever. So of course that is a return spring to help shuttle back the pistons. And there's something else in here. I drew two simple ports, into your reservoir. There's more than that, because if that was just one, then of course what would happen trying to shuttle this guy back and forward, it would of course these would slowly try to go back, and so there's two, if I look inside that guy, I cleaned him up. Let me just see, there we go. You can see there's two ports in there, one called a compensating port, one of course called a replenishing port. Now, many textbooks call those two ports totally different names, so there's like 4 to 5 different names. I like to use those two because it tells you exactly what it does: replenish and compensate. So I like to use words that describe their functions. Okay, let's then go over to the board. Okay, so there of course is my master cylinder with actually over here we've got the your brake lever, pushing onto a push rod that pushes right onto the a primary piston. And like we said over there over that way, we said that the primary pistons hydraulically will shove over the secondary piston also. But in case of a failure, there would be that push rod. Okay, let's get a little bit closer here and let it focus. Okay, so let's look at the primary piston. This would be, let's say, my replenishing port, the one inboard here, and over here would be my compensating port. Okay, compensating for what? Okay, brakes. What do brakes convert, let's say the kinetic energy into? Well, it's going to convert it into, of course, heat energy. So what happens when things heat up? No responses? None? Oh, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so what happens is, of course, things expand. So what happens in here, this hot brake fluid is going to want to start coming back, as it's expanding. Well, of course, if, let's say, we didn't have a spot for it to go through, right? If we didn't have this compensating port and we just eliminated it like this, well, then it can't go anywhere. So the easiest thing it's going to do is self-apply the brakes. Once the brake fluid heats up, it's actually going to increase the pressure in the line and actually push out the pistons in your calipers or wheel cylinders, depending on which style you have. It's going to push them out and apply them. So we can't have that. So that's why I call this a compensating port. So yes, truly, until you move your primary piston past that, it cannot build up any pressure. So if you actually have your cap off, let's say, and you just hit your brakes like real quick with the cap off, you'll see squirts shoot up, and that'll be normal until that piston gets past, let's say, your compensating port. So that's why I always leave the cap when I'm bleeding brakes. Leave the cap on but loose, so I can easily top it up if I'm bleeding, and that way, if I just take it completely off, I could actually, depending on how hard I hit the brake pedal, I could actually squirt some brake fluid out and actually hit, let's say, some painted surface on the car. Well, if that happens, wash off quickly with water just so you don't do any damage. Okay, so these are my compensating port. We need them for both. I had a friend one time who thought he was going to be get his brakes to apply quicker. So sometimes this push rod here is adjustable. Well, you're not supposed to adjust it. It's supposed to be set to a set, let's say, length, and that's it. Well, he decided that he's going to extend it a little bit to take up some of the pedal play in his pedal. Well, what he did was he shuttled his pistons over past the compensating ports. So as soon as he drove the car around, at first he said, oh geez, I really like that pedal. You know, it's as soon as I touch it near the top, I've got good brakes. But as soon as the brakes heated up, it started self-applying and stopped the car on its own. And of course that was the problem. Like you can't go past those compensating ports when you're, so do not adjust that push rod. Think that you're going to get better brakes. Okay, now the replenishing port is to keep this guy here full of fluid. Because I think when this guy goes forward, okay, so, we're using a force to push him over. But when we want to come back, what happens is this seal, then, so it doesn't take a long time to come back. I'm just going to erase it here, and I'm just going to draw it. Where's my green? Oop. See, I got the same problem at home. Okay, so what will happen here, your piston's going to lip like this, right? Because then your piston's going back like that. So it's going to lip like that to quickly apply. So it's not going to create a vacuum and slowly bring them back. And of course we need fluid on this side, so then you don't get any air pockets, right? And of course that's why you have your replenishing port. They replenish this area to make sure that you got quick activation of your pistons going back. And that's why they're both there. Okay, now let's just talk about, because this is great questions, especially if you're ever to see it on a test. Talk about, say, seal damage. So what would happen in your hydraulic circuit if your secondary piston lost its primary seal? Again, this is your primary seal. So if you lost this seal, the only brakes you'd lose are whatever brakes apply to your secondary circuit. So that's what you'd lose, right? If your secondary piston, secondary seal leaks, then you are going to lose your primary, because your primary, remember, instead of forcing and going down, it's going to go back and get up into this replenishing port. Nice and easy path, it's going to take it. So then we lose the primary if the secondary seal is leaking. If the primary seal is leaking, well then of course, yeah, it's obvious. You're going to lose, let's say, just your primary circuit in that mechanical push rod. That's about, let's just say, halfway. We'll then push the secondary over, so you still have brakes in your secondary. But imagine, of course, what's going to happen, right? You're going to have a low pedal because it's going to take that long for it to finally hit, right? So your pedal will be lower. Remember, this guy had a little mechanical push rod on it too, just in case, right? In case your secondary seal went, this guy was going to shuttle over really quickly because there's nothing forcing against it. It's just going to blow back. So of course, they don't want this to bottom out over here. This guy would go way past, right? And of course, and then you'd have a leak through your replenishing port here, and a very low pedal. So I mean, that would be right to the floor. If you got rid of this, your pedal would be to the floor, and maybe not even apply, let's just say, your primary side if that guy was gone and you had a failure here on your secondary primary piston, secondary's primary seal. Okay, so then, easy enough to understand. If we lose this guy, you lose your primary circuit. But what about my secondary seal, on my primary piston? So if I lose that one, basically what you're going to get is, through your replenishing port, you're going to have that external leak down the booster, right? And you're not going to really know it until it goes low enough. I mean, if you got a sensor in here for low fluid, if you don't, if you just keep on going, well then finally, as soon as you get air in this system, it'll be picked up and put a brake light on. But I mean, most of them nowadays have a sensor, to let you know you got low brake fluid. So I mean, in reality, if you had a primary piston secondary seal leak, it'd just be external, and the fluid would go down your reservoir, and that'd be about it. Okay, that's a few things about the primary and the secondary piston. I hope that helps. And again, I'll try to do a little bit more of these. We'll take a caliper apart. So I'll probably take this whole caliper apart here. I'll take this guy apart, and then but what I'd like you guys to do at the same time is there's two styles of drum brakes out there. There is a thing called dual servo, which is a little bit older school. A lot of my vehicles have them. They were into the 2000s. They don't tend to use them now just because they have a pretty good multiplication factor, and with vehicles today, not as required. So they use something called leading and trailing. Now, so those are just drum brakes, leading and trailing drum brakes, and of course a dual servo drum brake. So I'd like you guys to know the difference and be able to explain it. Okay, you guys again have a good day, and another day here at Merlin's Garage.